honestly, I'm tired of being stuck inside this home. I'm going to take a stand for women's rights. Hello, guys. We're going to be going over women's rights in our project. First, we're going to go over the cult of domesticity. The cult of domesticity isn't actually a cult, it's just a word used to describe the system of subjugation. The cult of domesticity supplied middle and upper class women with specific gender roles that would lock them inside their homes. This class system limited women's education and working ability outside their homes during the 19th century, but it also gave them a strong role inside their homes. Women were assigned the role of raising good, politically sound children and taking good care of their husbands. Although it allowed women to have a stronger role in the home than men, it usually restricted their roles outside the home. Anytime a woman could not be a part of a home due to low class or inability to keep a stable marriage, etc., women were forced into work to provide for themselves and their family if they had any kids. They were also labeled as unpure, fallen, or fatally flawed. Certain privileged women used their privilege to speak their voice or to find groups of other women who also shared the beliefs on public issues regarding women.
On July 19th and July 20th of 1848, the Seneca Falls Convention was held in Seneca Falls, New York. The Seneca Falls Convention was the first women's rights convention in the United States and is often referred to as the birthplace of feminism. Originally known as the Women's Rights Convention, the Seneca Falls Convention fought for the social, civil, and religious rights of women. The convention consisted of five main organizers: 1. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, 2. Lucretia Mott, 3. Mary McClintock, 4. Martha Coffin Wright, and 5. Jane Hunt. During the convention came a list of 11 resolutions, which demanded women to be regarded as men's equals. The resolutions called on Americans to regard any laws that placed women in an inferior position to men as having no force or authority. They resolved for women to have equal rights within the church and equal access to jobs. The Declaration of Sentiments was the Seneca Falls Convention's manifesto that described women's grievances and demands. It called on women to fight for their constitutionally guaranteed right to equality as U.S. citizens. Written primarily by Stanton, the Declaration of Sentiments was based on the Declaration of Independence to parallel the struggles of the Founding Fathers with those of the women's rights movement. The Declaration of Sentiments begins by asserting the equality of all men and women and reiterates that both genders are endowed with unalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It argues that women are oppressed by the government and the patriarchal society of which they are a part of. The text then lists 16 facts illustrating the extent of this oppression, including the lack of women's suffrage, participation and representation in the government, women's lack of property rights in marriage, inequality in divorce law, and inequality in education and employment opportunities. The document insists that women be viewed as full citizens of the United States and be granted all the same rights and privileges that were granted to men. In conclusion, the Seneca Falls Convention established the beginning of a long battle for rights amongst women.
Susan B. Anthony, one of the most visible leaders of the women's suffrage movement, she was born on February 15, 1820 in Adams, Massachusetts. She was inspired by the Quaker belief that everyone is equal under God, which caused her to fight for women to have equal rights. In 1851, Susan met Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and they worked together for 50 years to give women equal rights. She traveled the country giving speeches that demanded that women had the right to vote. Susan and Elizabeth co-founded the American Equal Rights Association, and in 1868 they became the editor of the Revolution, the official paper of the association, which helped spread the ideas of equality and rights for women. After the 14th and 15th Amendment, which gave slaves the right to vote, Susan and Elizabeth were mad due to the fact that it didn't give women the right to vote as well. They created the National Women's Suffrage Association to push for an amendment that gave the woman the right to vote. In 1872, Susan voted and was tried and fined $100, which caused many people to be angry, and this caused more attention to be brought to the suffrage movement. In 1876, she led a protest at the 1876 centennial of our nation's independence. There she gave a speech called the Declaration of Rights, which was written by Elizabeth and Matilda. In 1888, she helped merge the American Equal Rights Association and the National Women's Suffrage Association into the National American Women's Suffrage Association. She led this association until 1900, and she died in 1906, just 14 before the 19th Amendment was passed, which gave the woman the right to vote.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton was an American writer and activist who was a leader of the women's rights movement in the U.S. during the mid to late 1800s. She was the main force behind the Seneca Falls Convention, the first convention to be called for the sole purpose of discussing women's rights, and she was the primary author of its Declaration of Sentiments. Her demand for women's rights to vote generated a controversy at the convention, but quickly became a central tenet of the women's movement. Stanton's reform gained more rights for women by allowing them to leave marriages that were harmful to them, their children, or their economic well-being. Her unwavering dedication to women's suffrage resulted in the 19th Amendment to the Constitution in 1920, which ultimately granted women the right to vote.
Now we're about to take you into a whole different dimension. Too legit. Too legit. The dumb ethnicity, yeah, that third ring, the 19th century. Limited women answer their homes, did not let them break to their best ability. Limits in their education, it was segregation that anybody could see. So some women had to stand up for their own rights, like Susan B. Anthony. One of the most visible leaders of the women's suffrage movement. She met Lloyd Gerson and Frederick Douglass, who gave her inspiration. She met with a group of women at the Seneca Falls Convention, traveling around the country, giving speech to speech for women's suffrage. In the U.S., they held the very first women's rights convention. This is where they fought for social and religious rights of women. This resulted in the creation of the Declaration of Sentiments. In the meeting, they went over 11 different resolutions. All of them were passed except for the one about women's suffrage. Together, Elizabeth and Susan paved the way for the movement. Blooper time. Too legit. I'm tired of this. Honestly, I'm sick of being inside the house. I'm gonna take a stand for.
God, that's not even my fault.